Welcome to Sin News, the Inside Gaming podcast where we talk all about video games. I am Brian, your host.
I'm Alana. What's up? We also have two guests today.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Blessing. I'm kind of funny.
Hi, I'm Woolie from Woolie Versus.
Welcome, you guys. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We got a full house today. This is going to be awesome.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, so we're gonna the way we kind of do this, we're gonna talk about some news, then take some questions from our lovely fans. But first, let's talk about this has been going on all week. Obviously, the protests nationwide have been going on. Worldwide, yeah, that's right. I saw some huge protests like in the Netherlands and Paris and all over. But now gaming companies have been getting into the act and voicing support for various progressive causes, particularly Black Lives Matter, in a way that we haven't, at least I don't remember ever having seen this before. What have you guys noticed?
My biggest takeaway, the big one I saw that actually just happened this morning as we're recording is Take-Two, specifically Rockstar. They're going offline with their games for about 2 hours during the day, which sounds pretty small when you just hear like, oh, 2 hours of protest. All right. But I think for like a Rockstar game, when you look at GTA Online, you look at Red Dead Online, like them going offline for 2 hours is a pretty big statement, especially when you look at the amount of people that are playing those games. Specifically
that's thousands
GTA
of dollars.
Online. That's that's thousands and thousands of dollars, but that's also like thousands and thousands of people who are going to have to like stop and not be able to play a game and have to look at, all right, well, why can't I play this? Oh, okay, things are going on in the world. I guess I got to pay attention to this now. Like that's the big one for me that I saw that felt big. And then, of course, the PlayStation 5 event got pushed, got delayed. And that was, of course, going to reveal so many PlayStation 5 games. And that's another one that I feel like was big. Of course, you know, I'm sure marketing comes into play at a certain point. I'm sure there are conversations behind the scenes as far as like, all right, like, is it really a good time to be showing PlayStation 5 games? Do people really want to pay attention to what we have to show?
Are we going to be able to trend in competition with these other hashtags right now?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's the big thing is like, I'm sure advertising and PR and marketing very much comes into play with that. But, you know, as a side effect of it, that is another thing that makes people pause and makes people go like, oh, well, yeah, I guess like this thing that I was looking forward to has gotten pushed because of bigger things that are going on in the world. I have to pay attention now to what's going on with the Black Lives Matters movement and the protests and everything else. And so it's been very interesting to see.
I have been trying to... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, just to comment on that, I think it is interesting, as you're saying, like there are definitely different degrees of messaging we're seeing from a lot of companies. I would say that the feeling of sincerity it's a gradient. There are some cases where it feels a little bit shallow, and I think that like when you, as you do mention though, like PlayStation 5 event would not get coverage, so it just makes sense for them to do it this way. But it's like, again, because it's the practical thing to do, that means that the size of and the scale of what's going on does force you to sort of acknowledge it. That in and of itself is something pretty incredible.
It's a net positive in the end, but I was basically going to say the same thing. Like company by company is how I'm like going like, all right, with that one's bullshit. Like, and you pay attention to who's like donating money, and of course people reply to that and go, well, charity's a tax write-off. Like, yeah, but that's kind of unavoidable. Like, I do think that, like, I appreciate what Nintendo did. I thought EA's response was really good, whereas some of them have felt really hollow and pointless. So it's kind of all over the place. Hard not to be a little bit critical of some of these things when there are so many companies that have taken just utter inaction previously when it comes to just blatant racism on their multiplayer servers or whatever. So, like, it's a mix, but ultimately the fact that everyone's doing it is helpful.
One of the big ones in regard to that is Call of Duty, right? Like they put out a statement saying that, hey, we're going to crack down on racist content in our games, whether that's clan tags, whether that's usernames. And that's one of those ones where like I looked at it and I was like, where have you been for the last 15 years? Like this is not a new problem for Call of Duty. Like
I didn't realize how bad it was until I saw that video of the guy just scrolling through every username that has the N-word in it and being like, oh my, how have you just now decided that this is worth fixing? Think about every single black person who's ever played that game and has seen that and has been like, what? And they just didn't care? Like, oh.
Yeah, like I've played Call of Duty quite a bit over the years, right? I've been big into Black Ops specifically, and I haven't really like gotten into a Call of Duty, like into it since probably about Black Ops 3. And so this last actually about within the last couple of weeks, I got into Modern Warfare a bit, right? The latest Call of Duty that's released. And I started playing some gunfight. I started playing some gun game. I started playing some deathmatch. And taking that break from Call of Duty since Black Ops 3 and now jumping back into it and being like re-reminded of how many people are saying terrible, terrible things in chat was like, though that was not an eye opener because I knew about it, but a very big reminder of like, wow, there's a lot
been happening
to do.
That whole time.
It's been happening that whole time.
Yeah, that's the thing is, I mean, you mentioned like, sort of black people coming into these games and going like, whoa, what's going on here? But the truth is, I think, I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself and I can speak for people I know. A lot of us are kind of like, it's more like you come in, you see that type of thing in the game and you're just like, oh yeah, this is what it is. It's been this way. When you jump online and you play anything in a massively multiplayer context, you're going to just encounter that, and you kind of just get used to that being sort of like this is the culture you're participating in, and this is what you're used to. It's
the same for homophobic slurs. Like people getting called that F word. I get a bunch of sexist garbage when people figure out that I'm a woman. So I mostly say I'm a 12-year-old boy, which I can get away with because I have a deep voice. It works great. But it is just, especially the N word being so prevalent in titles, like the fact that is something that you just have to get used to, or that just gotten used to, fucking sucks.
It's a thing that's been normalized for sure.
I get a little conspiratorial about this, though, because I feel like if they wanted to, just permaban people on the first offense for this shit, and then it's done with. But I feel like they're worried about losing that business. They're worried about, well, how many people would they have to ban? And so,
of course, they won't do it.
And so it just, I've noticed the same thing. I still play StarCraft 2. I put this in the script for one of our videos, but it is a cesspool, and it is completely unmoderated, and the general chat is just awful. And I contacted Blizzard, and they're like, well, people can report it if they want, and that was pretty much the
mean anything.
It sucks when the filter that has to go up is a mental one, for these types of things. But I will say that like there's like, I can imagine an instance of someone is literally a ridiculous 12-year-old child that thinks they can get a rise out of everybody that does this. There is a possibility that, down the line, if they turn 16 or 17 or 18, like the idea of the permaban immediately on the first infraction might be an overstep for a game that they've purchased. I think that you can have a degree of
moderation
with that,
except when cheating is concerned, because that requires so much effort. That I'm like permaban them. But I think you're right. Like a lot of these cases, like I might have even spoken about this last week. I don't want to like be the person who talks about getting rape threats, but when I got rape threats from 12-year-olds or whatever, like no part of my brain took that as an actual threat. It was a 12-year-old saying something that they knew was inherently offensive, but didn't really understand why they were saying what they were saying and just throwing it into the air. So when I screenshotted that and shared it forever ago, I wasn't like keeping their details in there because I'm not going to dox a 12-year-old who doesn't know any better and ruin their life. I don't think they meant that they actually wanted to do that. It's just someone being an absolute idiot and needing to learn and grow up. Which I get that there's nuance to that.
Yeah,
and they need to be more or less.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say the biggest normalization or the biggest problem is the normalization of it. Is like the fact that it like we don't even have like that reaction of like, oh my god, right? Like when I first started playing Rainbow Six Siege about like 2 years ago, I remember going into a public match for the first time and like being on comms. And since it was one of my first times playing the game, I accidentally got a team kill because I wasn't paying attention. And I remember on comms, like somebody else calling me the N-word. And like my reaction wasn't like, oh my god. My reaction
you shouldn't have killed a teammate, Blessing.
My first reaction was like, how did you know? Like what like I have a very neutral tone. How did you figure out I was black, dude? But then I was also like, wow, that's not like a good thing. Like that shouldn't be your go-to. That shouldn't be like a trigger where you get killed immediately. You're like, oh, how dare you? Like and you say those slurs.
Heated gamer moments, man.
Yeah, having those heated gamer moments. So it's so bad. It's normalized at this point. I like that Call of Duty is taking action about it. And I've been saying this phrase a lot, and it's from a Drake song from like his first album. But better late than never, but never late is better is how I kind of look at it. Like, I'm glad you're doing this now.
Lord and Savior Drake.
From our Lord and Savior, yeah,
quote.
Drake. Thank me later. Yeah, like that is very much how I feel about the whole situation, and with a lot of the responses. Like a lot of the good. There's a lot of good ones. There's a lot of like ones, right? I like action. That's kind of where I stand. Is I like when you back up your statements with something actionable, and so I like what Humble is doing, especially where Humble Bundle is funding Black developers, and is donating a large amount of money toward Black creators, which I think is an incredible thing. That's what I like to see with all of this, right? I like to see action.
On the counter though, when I see stuff like GameSpot was like, hey, I believe the exact tweet was, for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, we will stop posting on our social feeds.
Ooh, thank you.
You know? And it's like, hey, yeah, cool. You mean those feeds that you tweet on like every hour or so?
Yeah,
like,
the last tweet was 20 minutes before
what
that.
are you accomplishing?
That was
like,
a terrible one.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for stopping for 10 minutes, To
give GameSpot a little bit of bail, that was like a CBS Interactive white thing where I saw Giant Bomb do the same thing, and they're both under the same parent company.
So
and
stupid.
like it's a stupid thing.
Yeah.
And I think GameSpot had like a better actual response to it that came from their team, which I really
They
liked.
are also doing charity streams for the next 6 weeks to raise money for Black Lives Matter, which I feel like
sense.
That takes time, that's salary, so they're putting towards doing something. I agree, those tweets are absolutely stupid. And I did want to mention, since you're here, Blessing, if you're okay with talking about it,
go for it.
You were mostly the one who screenshotted and shared the tweet from Dan Stapleton, the executive editor of reviews at IGN. I can't remember what it was that he said exactly, but it was something along the lines of, well, if Black people would just apply, then maybe we could hire them. It wasn't like quite that harsh, but that was basically
that was basically the heart of it,
said.
right? Like, I have it pulled up here since you brought it up, right? He tweeted, I think I can speak for just about everybody in games journalism when I say that we love to hire more Black and other minority writers, but we can't if we don't hear from you. When you see job postings go up, apply, or recommend someone who should. Which I think, in some sense is somewhat of an innocent statement, but when you like look into it, or when you like read it and reread it and think about it, it's a statement that takes a lot of responsibility out of the situation on the side of people who are hiring, right? Like there are people you can talk to. There are ways in which you can invite people, invite a diverse group of people to apply for the job and see.
You can go to career fairs at various colleges. You can you can cast like a wide net. It shouldn't all be upon just.
I do think
the applicants you get in.
Yeah, Dan's a good dude. Generally, like, I do think he didn't have ill intentions. I think he just doesn't understand. And part of it is, as someone who worked at IGN for a really long time, I can openly say I had to put up a fight to have our first Black host on the Daily Fix. That was an argument I had to have with execs. They weren't arguing with me because he was Black, but it was still like, we never had a person of color host that show. And I was like, if I'm leaving today, and when I was hosting it, I'm like, I'm not going to have the same 2 white dudes every week. Why would we do that? This is a show where anyone can read from a prompter and bring a different perspective on their own accord. Why am I going to have the same 2 people over and over again? And it was an argument. So it's like, from the IGN side, I get where Dan is coming from. He doesn't understand that part of it is also that when IGN is so goddamn white in the first place, people aren't necessarily going to feel welcome to apply. There are so many layers of making that better.
Like, I know for me, right?
feel
like sorry, I was gonna say, I know for me, when I quote tweeted that tweet, I quote tweeted and said that, like, I've applied to IGN countless times. Like, that's like, there it's not like people aren't applying to IGN. And I know for me also, like, optically, I recorded Podcast Beyond this week with IGN, right? And it was actually right after I got off of Beyond when I looked and I saw that Dan Stapleton tweet. And for me, that's actually a sign of, it's not that there aren't qualified Black people to work there, right? Like, it's not like there aren't qualified Black people applying, because I also hosted their Black History Month stream in February. Like, there are people that are qualified and people that you will have on, but there is work to be done as far as actually bringing people on, right? Like you can't play both sides where you're like, yeah, we'll have black hosts on when it's Black History Month or when there was a shooting last week, or not a shooting, but a black murder last week.
Yeah.
But like also we need you guys to apply more. You can't play both sides that way.
The apply posts, I feel like in many cases when I've seen those, there's usually a series of quoted threads with people going, I did.
Yeah.
This is something that happened. You see multiple people going like, we did that. And so what else,
Right.
I think part of it is being part of the hiring process at IGN for multiple different occasions as well. I also know they don't read all their applications because they get thousands and thousands and thousands. So
that's what I was going to say. They're IGN. I'm sure they get hundreds every day.
So many.
Exactly.
And I'm sure most of those are white.
Yeah, and what I would suggest that they do is, even if it feels weird and maybe offends some people from applying, fuck those people, have a tick box. Like literally allow people to identify that they are people of color or part of the LGBT community, so that those people actually have their applications read, because IGN does need to try harder, and not even in a way that it's like, oh, make things more diverse. And it's not just IGN. Frankly, Rooster Teeth does too.
This is a
massive
huge issue at Rooster Teeth.
It's not that it's just about like, well, we want diversity so that we're virtue signaling. It's also that if you have different perspectives, your writing team is stronger. You have a broader range of features that you can pull from, people with different backgrounds and different opinions and completely different experiences. Like, I don't want to know what a white person thinks of Barrett in Final Fantasy. If you don't have someone in your staff that you can pull on to talk about any race-related issues, it is a detriment to your team, and you're missing out on like also just very important content. So it's not just about like, it benefits them. It benefits them too, and it's something that I hope people start taking more seriously. And just props to you for having the balls to tackle big old Dan Stapleton. Blessing.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Lana.
It's interesting you mentioned Final Fantasy there, because the first thing that comes to mind for me is, I guess, like, anyone can write like a given story from their perspective and review something that a review of Final Fantasy game, and talk about whatever elements stand out to them. And let's say someone wants to speak about Barrett as a character that went from a Mr. T to a Mr. T with a little bit more going on in Remake. I think that type of thing could be much more interesting, especially if you are coming from a Black experience and you kind of know what that is like and how these depictions tend to go in media in general, and you can speak about whether what you think was comfortable and what isn't comfortable. That exact topic comes to mind right away when you say Final Fantasy.
Yeah, I think that these outlets, again, us included, are selling themselves short by not putting more effort, while also selling an entire race short.
I also think that hiring people also will sort of say certain things. It's almost like code, like, well, our audience is used to these guys. Let's not, we don't need new people in or whatever. And I think that, it's almost a subtle, like, well, let's just go with the norm. And when you're white, especially when you're a white dude, you get the sort of benefit of being just the norm.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I guess I kind of think, though, like, the idea of like the checkbox does make me feel a little weird. I
Could
would
be tokenistic.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that type of thing being added to like applications. But what I do like is if the person that is hiring is basically able to scout talent, and they scout in such a way that they can keep these things in mind as they look for people and as they try to get different perspectives going.
Yeah, like I'm a big fan of initiative, right? Like, whether it is the checkbox thing, which I think comes with like pluses and minuses, right? Like I know for me, when I see a checkbox, I'm like, all right, cool. Like it makes me excited and scared, because in my mind I'm like, all right, cool. This is a company that might be looking out for trying to hire diverse, but then also like, am I also
take me seriously?
Am I doxing myself if I check myself as an African American? And does that then take me down a few notches as far as like who's hiring and what they might be looking for or might not be looking for? But I do like initiative.
So something else that comes to mind too, when again talking about the corporate responses to these things, is in some case, one of the stories I was talking about earlier on my podcast this week was the idea that sometimes it's not even necessarily the sincerity of the statement or how it sounded, but just like the history of the company in particular. Yeah. And so one of the messages that came out from Activision Blizzard about their support for the movement and what's going on right now just it fell on deaf ears because it's like, hold on a minute, like what about Hong Kong and the fact that you guys censored someone, Blitzchung, you know, and that whole event, like the level of hypocrisy that comes from like tactically choosing when you want to support human rights and when you don't is just, it's hollow and kind of gross, guys.
I feel like also, I keep yelling this.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, and also I was gonna use YouTube as an example. They made a big show about making a donation. YouTube has platformed more racist and more white supremacists than anyone, and they're still on. And the people make a living off that. And so for them to not clean up their own house first is just ridiculous.
I feel like I talk about this all the time, but I should just write something about it because I always bring it up that no one talks about it, is that Diablo Immortal is a mobile game, thus is probably going to have a big audience in China and Japan. They also just happened to remove the witch doctors, so there are no black characters in that game, which, you know, there are issues with the witch doctors and their representation anyway, but my guess is that that's because they were like, won't sell as well in China if we have black people in it, which is fucked up. Like, Blizzard, we know what you're about.
I mean, yo, like after that Star Wars poster edit and after like some of the there was literally like an edit that had John Boyega removed from a Star Wars poster that was in China, and there was like a whole article written up about like Black Panther's reception and how Marvel movies explode, but this one didn't. There's a level of like when you say that story that just reminds me of those little bits of like, no, let's just make sure this market doesn't see anything they don't want to see right now. And that's garbage. I hate that.
That Star Wars tweet where they said, we stand with you, John Boyega. I was like, do you though? Do you?
Right. And why did you do that poster? Yeah. Why did you do that?
Yeah. It's bad. Blizzard especially. I'm like, you shut up. We know what you're about. Come on.
That's like the NFL tweet is where it's like, all right, guys, you can't be the hero and the villain here. Like, let's all calm down.
The Redskins.
The Washington Redskins was hilarious.
Like, yo,
that's like the KKK tweeting like,
I mean,
Black Lives, and it's like, no, we know you don't. We know.
You see that? Like that was true. Like on God, like word. That's how we're playing this? Like, okay.
The KKK tweeting Black Lives Matter. You're like,
it's like, well,
not sure about that.
And in the meantime, like, you know, on the flip side of things, you hit some shit like Ben and Jerry's coming out and throwing the gauntlet down, and you're like, yo, ice cream?
I'm eating
what are you doing right now?
They're historically very, very, very progressive. Yeah,
ice cream came hard. I was not expecting
full
that.
Support of like Occupy. Yeah, they
of all the things you're expecting, if it's not Ben and Jerry's.
I've never craved ice cream so much until this week.
Shit,
and that's my
wild.
thing when I look at the statements from all the different video game companies, right? Like, there's not been a company yet that has Ben and Jerry's it by any means, right? Like, there's not a company yet that I feel like has said all the things that needs to be said in the way that Ben and Jerry's did.
Yeah. We stand Ben and Jerry's
because they need plausible deniability in their statements, right?
Right, they're still riding a line there.
Exactly. You need to keep it so that like our support is inferred and it feels like you kind of hear what you want to hear from the phrasing here.
Exactly.
You know? That's the thing about it.
But we don't want the young white dudes to get too, upset about whatever we're saying.
For sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, go look at we talked about the PlayStation 5 delay, right? Like, go look at the thread underneath that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And, like, the level of just, like, no, I need PS5 news, and, like, how dare you? And it's just
a lot of responses that are just like, well, this is an American problem. What does it have to do with me? I'm like, you think this is an American problem?
Yeah. No.
Oh, no.
No.
I also wonder, just on a larger issue, and video games is not the only medium that does this. TV and movies do too. But, historically in video games, I feel like there's a tendency to put you in the role of a cop or a soldier. And I think there's just some inherent glorification there at all times, kind of like Law and Order episodes where it's like the cops are always the good guys. The defense attorneys are these sort of sleazy dudes always trying to kind of put one over and get a guilty person off. And I don't know. I feel like
that's the thing I hadn't thought about
just
until
this very
week.
Yeah, there's this very subtle, framing yourself always as as a cop on the side of justice and truth.
Everyone play Spec Ops: The Line. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, I just got through that
yeah.
actually not too long ago.
So good.
See, but at the same time though, again, I was just like, of all the example tweets you're talking about, like that. So that comes up. That's one thing, right? But there was a Randy Pitchford deleted a tweet. I don't know if you guys saw it.
Oh,
that
Classic Randy. Was it child porn?
No.
It was not. Not this time. It was
Picture of a USB drive.
No,
It was actually really good magic.
This time around, it was, if you want to kill some pig cops this weekend, here's Duke Nukem 3D's 20th anniversary world tour with a link to the Steam download to purchase the game. And it's just like, could you have less tact? Like, could you have less tact in handling a situation? Like, what is actually wrong with you?
Could Randy Pitchford have less tact?
I mean, the mess, like, not only did you throw it in there, not only did you come in with like the hottest ridiculous take, but you also come in there with here's a link to our game, please go buy it.
Right.
You know?
That's the Detroit Become Human thing. Where,
yes, exactly. That was next. I have 4 tweets open here.
Yeah.
It's not political. Just kidding. Yes, it was. Buy it right here.
The whole time David Cage was like talking about how it wasn't about racism, and then suddenly now that it can sell, it's about racism.
Just asking questions,
Guillaume,
he says.
Come on.
Yeah. And then his tweet as well, where like the phrasing of it, what was it? It was there was racism in any way, shape, form is stupid, must be fought against everywhere and always. All lives matter and are equal regardless of skin color and so on, and sexual beliefs. And
that one specifically, knowing Guillaume, not like I'm friends with him, but I did a studio visit. I think him saying all lives matter was an actual not English speaking person not
translation.
Yeah.
And also,
like it's not like he translates. He can speak English quite well, but I think that was quite literally him not knowing. Like he wasn't trying to make it.
I hear you.
Yes.
I hear you, but also I live in Montreal, Quebec. I speak French, and the French word for all and the French word for black are completely separate from each other.
No, that's what I mean. Not a translation issue. It's a cultural misunderstanding issue, because he can speak English. I think he just literally didn't understand that what all lives matter means. Like he did mean it in the broadest. Like I think that he just didn't get it. Like
I get that a bit, because like my dad is Nigerian, and he's also a pastor. And I remember a couple years ago, actually this was like 2014 when the Ferguson protests were happening. And I remember him being, he came back to the country to visit, and he was also giving like a message and preaching. And this was like when Black Lives Matter was kind of at its apex at the start of it, right? And that was like a thing that was trending. And I think that's when the ball really like started rolling as far as it being a thing that was widely conscious with people. And I remember my dad preaching all the right things as far as like, we got to do something, we have to be in our communities, and all lives matter. And when he said that, I was like, no, Dad, no, you don't understand. You can't say that. You can't say that way. Say black. Say black.
Yeah, okay. There's a connotation and a denotation, and there's certain people that don't necessarily catch on to the fact that it clearly is implying all Black Lives Matter too. You know, it's not something that is necessary. But like, you can benefit of the doubt that, right? That's fine if you want to, you know, okay, so that part of the tweet.
The rest of that tweet.
Toss it up, right? But then at the end of that, you get the at Detroit game is precisely about that. And it's like, throw the product in there, why don't you? Also, as you're making your statement.
Like,
and of course it's not. It's robots at the back of the bus. We're going to rise up. Like the level of like Quantic Dream and David Cage and having like any tact to handle that type of topic is a whole other thing. I literally there's a playthrough of that game of me just it's like a 20-hour eye roll of going through Detroit Become Human. You know, but it's just seeing that type of thing like tagged in when you're making your statement and stuff is just it just rings so hollow. And I mean, I gotta a shout out to a friend of our channel that like draws comics called Rayolith, where he had this it's like a random brand kind of like person in a comic going like, we're so sad about the events going on right now, and then like another brand puts a hand on their shoulder and goes, we're sad about the events too, please consume our products too, and they hug and they cry, and the word consume just floats overhead. You know,
and I feel like for all the ones that are fucking this up, it's like a Walking Dead, like I will remember that moment. Like, you know, it's not like I'm tweeting angrily at them, but all of the ones that are like doing a terrible job, like Guillaume did on behalf of all of Quantic. I'm like, Clementine, we'll remember that. We're like, we fucking see you. We know what you did.
Yeah.
We know what you're about.
I feel like this is obviously it's everyone's kind of jumping on board. Is there any chance that this could be some sort of watershed moment, though, when it comes to like, I don't know, like Infinity Ward did, you know, in terms of we're going to get better about tackling this sort of toxic chat in games? Are we going to look back in a few years and go, okay, that was when things actually really did start to change? Or is everybody just posting and then they're going to move on?
I think it's a mix.
Few weeks.
Seeing how it's played out historically, right? Seeing like the Michael Brown shooting and how the Ferguson protests happened, and then it calmed down like probably like 2 weeks later as far as the worldwide consciousness around it, and seeing how that has happened quite a few times over the years. Whenever this does get recorded and put out there and people see it and people get infuriated about it and people then forget, like this time for sure it feels bigger than it has within the last 10 years, which is awesome, you know, which is great. But you know, as far as like the wider conversation about it, I think it'll continue to move and it'll continue to exist. But my fear is that after, let's say, next week, I could very well see like everybody. I could very well see the trends not happening. Right. I could very well see myself opening Twitter and it being business as usual. We're back to talking about coronavirus.
Something pushes it off the headlines. Yeah.
I mean, exactly. If you're looking, if you're talking about like, you know, like those sort of the watershed moment, like ultimately, like if we're talking about video game companies and how they're handling these things, some of that and just on a larger bracket, we're talking about like brands and such. It's pretty much like if society actually, if we see net positive results out of this, right? Like by the end of it, if things actually do move forward, if we actually get legislation and things that change the rules and make a massive widespread impact, then I think you do see those effects and have a ramification across all things, so that when you get down to the specifics like video games, it'll make a difference, you know? Otherwise, you're kind of just like you're fighting uphill against like a massive
against nothing almost is like I think you're right. Unless we actually call for legislation or action, then I just worry that we're gonna have riots in LA in another 20 years, like we did 20 years ago and 20 years before that, for the exact same reason every single time.
Alongside a handful of nice tweets from some companies,
right?
Day.
So it's like,
there's some you know, some cultural issues that I think need to change too. Number one, just sort of coming to grips with our racist history as a country, but also, I mean, I think there's things like, why do we fund police departments at the level we do? Can we, you know, does that need to be scaled back and things like that? And I think there are some interesting questions being asked and points being made. But I think you're right. I think it has to happen more on that macro level. And
everyone just has to keep thinking about it too, because I think part of it that has helped this time around is that people have more power than they ever have before, which is a benefit of social media, in that we are recording everything the police are doing and sharing it. Whereas before, people would have been like, cops wouldn't do that. What are you talking about? But now that information is out there, we can hold these companies accountable. We can continuously try to put pressure on them to actually change things. So, you know, do I think that racism is solved as a result of this week? Absolutely not. But it feels like people have at least felt empowered, and I hope that stands, that we continue to feel like we can do something, and thus will actually try. But in full agreement, Woolie, that legislation is number one. I keep thinking about that. I'm like, we aren't asking for legislation, and we should absolutely be trying to ask for actionable government 100%. Level things.
Yeah, it has to come in on that level. And the thing that I kind of focused on too, over all of this, to be honest, is like, again, I broke this, like, there's this amazing thread I saw, and I broke this down on our podcast, and we basically looked at, there's a Samuel Sinyangwe, Sam Sway on Twitter made a tweet that basically has it looks like it's just it's a collection of maybe like 13 or 14 tweets, all linking to data, like statistical analysis and research on police violence over the years, and get things that they were able to gather from literally looking at like thousands of precincts over 20 years. Like, it's a humongous breakdown, and it goes into the detailed specifics of what can and what does reduce police violence and what doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was shockingly insightful, and like a lot of people had no idea about this. I didn't know a lot about this. Like, it opens with a statement that's like, there's a huge study here that proves that body cams do not reduce police violence at all, for example.
No way.
Right? Yeah. And you're like, but that's the first thing I think of in terms of accountability, right?
Right.
And like, and it jumps right off the bat. It's like, nope, here it is. We have a randomized control trial that evaluates the effects of police body-worn cameras and whether or not it reduces violent actions. And it doesn't. It gives you a better, it gives you evidence of like anything that happens that you need to see what went down. You know, you now have video evidence of it happening, but it is a statistically insignificant reduction in violence, right?
Wow.
And that's the opening salvo of like this amazing thread. It goes into how better police training as well doesn't necessarily have an effect, you know? And again, you think in your brain like, oh, well, body cams and extra training, why wouldn't that, isn't that kind of what we hear about as the way to fix this? And it's like, no, it literally doesn't. Here's the data.
Shit.
We have
That's
a, like,
nuts. Did you
go
link me
into,
that? I'd love to read it.
Yeah,
That's
really.
crazy.
Yeah, it you know, and then we're going, and it lists, you know, there's like peer-reviewed articles of just like studies that you can see where this doesn't work.
Wow.
And then it goes into what does work, you know, and what does work is effectively, in short, like a number of different counties have different policies on what police can do and cannot do, or like whether or not they have, like, for example, priorities like de-escalation as something they have to do, a continuum of force. Like, all these things are all broken down into these little detailed specifics so you can see how they work. It talks about how police unions literally have the power to renegotiate contracts every 5 years and wipe the slate clean for officers with infractions. So when you have 12 to 18, like Chauvin, you don't necessarily see the record disappear, but the police unions can make that thing happen. They can reinstate fired officers, right? They can do all kinds of insane, like, covering up and hiding of the, like, police who do bad work in the name of protecting those who are, like, in the right. And they can just basically emphasize the system where, like, you can more or less take bad cops and keep putting them back into the system.
I had no idea. That's nuts. God damn.
Yeah.
There you go.
All right, let's move on. We've got a couple of other stories to get to, but first, guys, let's talk about Shudder. And Shudder, you might be asking, what is that? Is a premium video service brought to you by AMC Networks. It offers an unbeatable selection of expertly curated horror, supernatural, and thrillers, uncut and commercial-free. It's got exclusive original titles you won't find anywhere else. You can start your free trial today, risk-free. Guys, if you like horror, if you like thriller, just sort of suspense stuff, if you grew up, I'm an 80s kid. I grew up with stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, just my favorite. This is like going into a video store and asking, like, what do you got? What are your good horror films? And this is for you. Shudder, you can stream great thrillers, horror, and suspense. $5.99 a month, $56.99 a year. Some have called it the Netflix for horror. So you know what? If you like being scared, Shudder might be for you. There are new spine-tingling thrillers, shocking horrors, and edge-of-your-seat suspense added daily. You've got unlimited access to stream ad-free on all your favorite devices, iPhone, iPad, Apple TV, Xbox One, Amazon Fire TV, Google Chromecast, Roku, Android devices. So, you know, you can get it on anything. It's like Stadia if it worked. Just throwing that out there.
Oh,
I'm a big speaking of 80s stuff, I was a big fan of Creep Show back in the day. They've got an original series, Creep Show. It's awesome. I love it. They kind of brought it up to date. It's awesome. They've got The Room, a Shudder exclusive. Come on. 3 from Hell by Rob Zombie. So if you're into this kind of stuff, this is what you need to be on, Shudder. All right, so here is what you do. You need to try, if you want to try Shudder for free for 30 days, go to shudder.com. That's SHUDDER.com. Use promo code SENDNEWS. That's SENDNEWS. I'm going to read it one more time. Get started streaming the best horror, thriller, and supernatural content to try Shudder free for 30 days. Go to Shudder, SHUDDER.com. Use promo code SENDNEWS. Thanks to Shudder for sponsoring us. All right, so let's move on. Another big story this week, and this was from Jason Schreier, who is now at Bloomberg, not at Kotaku anymore. They've been hemorrhaging staff, speaking of horror. And this had to do with Take-Two. Obviously, Take-Two owns Rockstar, owns 2K. They've got their private division going. But they had also bought the rights to make the sequel to Kerbal Space Program. And there was a studio that was making Kerbal Space Program, and they were called Star Theory Games. It's not the original, but this was a new studio that was making Kerbal Space Program 2. They were coming up to renegotiate their contract with Take-Two. They couldn't come to an agreement. Take-Two cancels the contract and then basically poaches all of their staff and starts a new studio to make the next Kerbal Space Program. So pretty brutal. Just a reminder of how kind of vicious the video game industry can be.
Yeah. I before I got into this like YouTube and Twitch game, I used to work in compliance quality assurance for like about 10 years. I've worked at various studios, and like I've seen this type of thing, and I've seen better and worse. There's a level of just like, it sounds so gross, but internally they're just looking at the bottom line and going, how can we keep these people and not have to deal with the company itself? Right. You know, they just see it as a bottom line on that, and like there's zero sort of like almost like there's so many cases like this where they go, all right, bottom line, this is the best way to do it. Let's do it. Send out these LinkedIn things to everybody and try to bring them over. And they don't for a second kind of consider how awful are we going to look the moment this comes out for anybody that's not interested.
When you say it that way, it doesn't actually sound that evil, which like it is a fair point. It's like, I mean, this is a crazy thing to do. And I think it's especially just like so harsh because we know how much of a juggernaut Rockstar is and how much money they make and how just intimidating shark cards are in general. Like, we don't stand a chance against the people who make those. When you put it that way, they're like, well, they're trying to keep the people in the studio. They just don't want to work with that company. It's like, maybe there's some nuance there that I hadn't thought about. I don't know.
It's a gross move, but they don't really even like care about, you know, the way it looks. And most importantly, if they can get most of the staff or the staff that matters, then like at the end, it's like, well, you'll forget about the story. The game will launch. It'll make its money. Everything's fine. Yeah,
I guess as long as they're all still getting paid the way that they should and haven't been like massively screwed over by it.
Well, and only recently have we really... We only recently, I just want to add, have we really even been paying attention to workplace issues? I mean, it's not something that, and I'm talking about the last, over the last 5 to 8 years and just the crunch conditions involved, because it just hadn't been reported on really that much, at least from the sort of games media perspective, at least not that I can tell. I don't know. I think, this is an effort to probably just keep labor costs down. That's always the biggest expense of any company. They're trying to do that. It's why they resist unionization. This was I think to bring these people in sort of into more of an in-house role, and they got all the main players of the who are working at the old studios. So Rockstar didn't get this rich by being dumb.
I remember when it, before it was called Crunch, it was called BioWare Magic.
Yes. It's magic. It just happens.
Hey, we got the secret sauce.
Everybody just puts their,
the
nose to the grindstone.
The sweat of their employees.
Right.
And in some cases, magic. Or in some cases, it's like, hey, this is a self-imposed thing. And like, I remember reading about on Smash Brothers how Sakurai, he's like, I'm in the office with an IV drip, but it's okay. Don't worry about me, and things like that. And it's just like, guys, like, you need to have systems in place where you don't overwork your employees until they literally drop dead.
Yeah.
You know,
and guess what? If your boss is in the office at all hours of the day, you're in the office all hours of the day.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to leave before the boss does. And you're, so as the head, as the leader of the studio, you set the tone. I mean, you just,
there's literally a word, karoshi in Japan, that is like work death.
Yeah.
And it is a thing you can follow of like people who have expired while we're overworking themselves, you know, and they had to like basically have years of putting in like restrictions against that type of thing occurring for them to finally listen. I remember hearing about how Nintendo had a massive overhaul in like basically minimizing, you know, overworking conditions, and it seems like it was a big success for them, from what I recall.
Yeah, I remember an interview with Reggie Fils-Aimé that was like it was like a Waypoint interview from a few years ago, and he was talking about how the topic of crunch came up, and he was talking about how we minimize crunch by hiring more people, like contracting more people, by increasing the number of people that are working on a project, as opposed to like making employees stay at work for 12 hours a day for 5 weeks. Like, you know, there are sensible ways to take care of crunch, and from what I understand, Nintendo of America at the very least seems like, I'm not going to say they have it down because I don't work there and I don't know all the facts there, but from that interview, it seems like they have their head in the right place.
I feel like all my friends who work there seem to be doing pretty well. Like, it is obviously a major issue with culture in Japan in general. I remember when I was in Tokyo, just seeing people still in their work suits sleeping outside of the buildings that they work in, because they don't even really have time to go home, and they live so far away because Tokyo's so expensive. Like, it puts things into perspective. It's pretty crazy. And
there is the argument too that lots of people have made that it's just not sustainable, that people just quit the industry and then you have to you aren't able to replace them, or at least replace them with the same level of talent. Naughty Dog allegedly went through that a lot with The Last of Us too, that just a lot of turnover, bringing in sort of junior level people. It took longer to get them up to speed, and this is why it took so long. So
it frankly happens in games media as well, which I know nobody has sympathy for because everyone hates the media. But like,
we're the real victims.
Yeah, I worked 6 weeks without a single day off at IGN one time. You know, like 6 full weeks without a day off, and that like it wasn't uncommon for me to be at the office till 2 a.m. It happened all the time. It's for sure an issue with media too. It's just people leave. That's why people end up going to PR. Like, they're like, I can't do this media shit
and
anymore.
You get more money.
Yeah, you can't afford to live, and you work your whole life, and everyone on the internet hates you.
I'll never forget when I was working, QA, and like there was a game that was in crunch. So they the outsourcing place I was working with started introducing day shift, night shift, dead shift. You know, like they had the triples going, and they needed more like team project leads to basically like be around for each shift, and so they started, like, at first they had people doing double shifts and signing up, and at a certain point they actually had pressure on for some people to work triple shifts, and it was completely nonsense, and like everyone pretty much turned it down, but there were a few who did not. And I remember one dude in particular, I had come in to do just the dead shift, and like I remember my friend was telling me about how like the guy was working, and after he did 3 shifts back to back, midway through the third shift, like maybe 4 a.m, there was a point where they were seeing like he was like trying to open a bug in like a database, and like he was just clicking on the same thing for like 10 minutes in a row and nothing was happening.
Having QA testers
like
be to that point, you basically need to QA test the QA testers. You have
at that point,
testers.
Someone had to physically walk over and like go like, dude, what are you doing? And they tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned, and like literally just eyes watering, he was like asleep, but like crying at this. It was messed up. Oh
my god!
You know,
it's just not a good idea. It's the quality's
like, dude,
worse.
go home. You can't work like this, you know. But this is what the company was encouraging.
No, I know, like EA way back in the day used to have like point systems where they would give people rewards for how long they worked for and stuff like that. And just like it's just not a good idea. Rockstar's done it too.
Yeah, taking it back, they there's been a lot written about crunch there. They like to see people at their desks, in the office, even on weekends. And yeah, Alana, you were talking about media. I mean, I think the problem with news is it just never stops. And, you know, and in gaming, you know, even when we're all asleep over here in North America, well, then there's all kinds of stuff going on. And, you know, there's news breaking in Japan, there's news breaking in China. And it just, it can never end if you don't let it. I mean, I've, you know, I came up in newspapers. There were people who would live at the office. It would kill marriages. It would kill, you know, families. It's just, I think this has to come from management though, because nobody else has the authority. Your boss needs to come in, or your boss's boss, and be like, hey, go home. Like, and don't come back.
Yeah. The big thing is establishing a healthy culture.
Yes,
right? Like, and that's the thing that's the thing that's, I think, probably very difficult to grasp. Like, you look at the story with Riot and all the things that was going on there. And what that comes down to is culture, right? Like, if you're not shutting down toxic behavior in the workplace, if you're not doing that actively, if you're not finding ways to practically encourage your employees to go home. Like, I understand that you really want to get this thing right. I understand that you're waiting for Tom over in animation to get his thing done so that you could do your thing on the programming side. Like, you know, there's so many moving parts, and video games are huge and incredible, and still blow my mind whenever I play a new one. Right, playing Final Fantasy VII Remake blew my mind while playing it, because that's a thing that people made. Right, playing even playing Undertale, which like comes off as the most simple thing. Right, like even that blows me away, because that's one dude pretty much that made that game, and that game is as incredible as it is, and it's one of my favorite games of all time. Like, video games are this like cool, technical, but also artistic, like, feat, right? Like, there's so many different elements, from music, from visuals to art to voice acting to mocap to all these. There are so many different moving parts, which makes it probably that makes video games probably one of the hardest, most difficult things to make. And so, like, in a way, it's almost understandable that you know, crunch and terrible work culture exists, because like y'all are trying to make something big. At the same time, like, that is why you need to be practical about it. Like, that is why you need to like actually like take a stand and be like, all right, as a manager, it's my job to make sure that you guys are seeing your families. Like, you guys are going home. And you guys
because like what you're describing.
Suffering.
Yeah, because I mean, like, all that, like, the technical marvel, the amazingness of what you're describing, it's made by people, right? These are people, and like, just on not even just on the like the like, you know, the regular health and well-being of like your employees level, but on a level that is like mental health. I know, like, firsthand, and I've watched and I've seen, like, you are already in a state of like, just like, things are much more stressful as a game is coming to a close anyway, even if you're working normal hours, right? When games are going through the last you know, it's called the compliance phase, like the final phase before it releases. You have to go through a lot of extra work to make sure everything is in place. If you add on top of this already stressful time, lack of sleep, extra hours, no home time, no downtime, like, it is not uncommon to see nervous breakdowns occur. You know, like, you do see that, and people don't quite easily get over that. It's not like, oh yeah, and then they got a good night's sleep and they were back to normal after that. Like, some people had serious issues that stayed with them for a very long time. From
I know someone who worked
projects.
at EA who ended up in basically a mental ward. Had a breakdown so bad working there that he had to be institutionalized, because it just absolutely broke him as a person. So he had to stop working for, I think it was a full year, that he couldn't function as a human anymore because the pressure was so bad. It's like, this stuff is it's not just like a talking point that, you know, we bring up as like, maybe unionize. Like, it is very serious stuff. Yeah. It is very exploitative.
I mean, you look at Hollywood, heavily unionized, you know. And
it drives me nuts. I'm like, why can't we get that?
Right. All right, let's go on to our last story. Alana, do you want to talk about this one? You brought it up.
I just wanted to talk about this because I'm a real big fan of VR and a real big fan of HalfLife Alex. So the story, this is from Game Rant, is HalfLife Alex dramatically increases number of Steam VR users. After the first Half-Life games redefined first-person shooting, Half-Life Alex has had a similar impact on VR, which is kind of what I always expected. And the thing that I have with Valve is, you know, people are always like, why won't they make games? In my head, they have no reason to make games when Steam just prints money. They don't even need to make a video game ever. Why would they, frankly? It's almost not worth the resources. But I think that Valve will do it, and Gabe Newell is still extremely passionate about what he does, if they can change the industry. Like, Half-Life did change the industry. I mean, obviously, Doom did before it, but Half-Life had a dramatic impact on the way that even video game narratives are told. And I've had a conversation with Ken Levine before, the creator of BioShock, where people always, like, anytime I mention this quote, are always like, I disagree, but Ken said it, is that BioShock is just Half-Life reskinned. Sure, they built their own story around it, but to its core, BioShock is just a different take on what Half-Life invented. And aside from the
it's
audio
one of those
logs,
games like Ocarina of Time, like even if you hadn't played it, it influenced everything that came out.
Yeah. So aside from the audio logs, which I think BioShock did technically bring to the table, it is like, I get what he's saying. It's just a different take on what Half-Life basically established. So Half-Life Alex has kind of done that for VR. Obviously, it's still really limited because not that many people have VR, but it is like just incredible. Like, just the tech is so good, especially if you have a Quest and you can play it wireless, which is what I've been doing. Oh my God, it rules.
You can do that?
Yeah.
Finally.
Because I have a Quest and I've been wanting to play this so badly.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
What?
Do it now.
Oh my God, my heart.
Today.
When this podcast ends.
It's
I'm
so
playing
good.
Half-Life Alex.
Oh my God, it's absolutely incredible.
And the liquids they just added to bottles, like
so
just showing
excited
that
about those
physics,
liquids.
it's insane.
Oh yeah, give me those liquids. It's so dope.
This story is like that. This isn't surprising because, I mean, the technology existing has never been a reason for people to jump in. You always need the killer app, as the term is. You know, you need the convincing thing that is not just a tech demo or a glorified tech demo. You know, like in some cases you have I've had some really cool experiences. There's the X-Wing mission that you can do for the X-Wing. Yeah, exactly. The X-Wing VR mission. That's like amazing, but it's a half an hour little tech demo, you know?
I mean, I think Beat Saber's really good, but that's still the same thing over and over again. Super Hot VR, I do think is like totally incredible. Robo Recall is good, but also gimmicky. Like, they're just kind of too limited in terms of mechanics.
Keep talking and no one explodes.
Astronaut Rescue Mission is one of my favorite VR games. Like, that game feels like almost you're playing like a Super Mario 64 kind of experience, right? Like, it's more linear, but it's still incredible.
Was Super Lucky's Tale in VR?
They made a VR version, yes.
They did, right? So, and I just remember, like, the one thing that I liked about that was that you could, like, move in and look at the little fox, and it was very cute, but otherwise I didn't really have reason to play that in VR. Chronos
but it feels like you're playing with your toys, right?
Yeah,
like when you're the floating
it is really cool, but that's not quite enough, whereas you're right, I think that Half-Life Alex is, while all of those other games exist, and I don't want to discredit them, and I did mention it, I always mention it, Chronos, play it, I love it. That's also on Quest, I believe. Was an Oculus exclusive in any case. Alex is like the one that actually like feels like it is not just a game that was made for VR as a VR game like a Beat Saber is. It feels like a game that just happens to exist in that landscape and pairs so well with that hardware that I'm just glad that this happened, because I feel like there've been a lot of naysayers who've been like, it's never going to take off, it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's been floating in limbo for a while, but again, like this plus not being wired in, right? Not being as cumbersome as the initial launch for a lot of the early VR stuff is like a huge convincing thing for a lot of people to jump in.
Yeah, that's been my experience for PlayStation VR, because as people probably know, I host a PlayStation podcast, I Love You XOXO, youtube.com, so it's kind of funny games. Go check it out. And PSVR has been my main VR platform, and I absolutely love it. I think the library on PSVR is absolutely incredible, right? Like I mentioned Astrobot Rescue Mission, but there's also there's of course Beat Saber, but Tetris Effect came out originally on PSVR. Blood and Truth is another incredible game there.
I Expect You to Die.
I've not heard of that one.
It's really cool. It's basically like you're Bond and you're trapped in Bond's gonna die because of this convoluted series of traps, and lasers gonna kill you type of thing, and you have to use in VR you have to kind of figure out the puzzle, get out of the car before it falls through midair and explodes. And
I think Naomi Kyle might voice a character in that.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah,
it's basically Bond trapped and trying to escape the villains' devices and machinations.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Also, Werewolf is really good. PSVR, the community on that's great.
PSVR is absolutely incredible. VR in general is absolutely incredible. But yeah, like I got an Oculus Quest probably around like 4 weeks ago at this point, and playing around with it, like to your point, Woolie, like not being tethered by wires or cables makes that experience so dope.
So
to the point where like it feels so much more accessible, because I just put it on and I'm ready to go. Whereas PSVR has so many. One, there's so many cables. I had to have it plugged into the front of my PS4 USB, and of course, there's only 2 USB slots that for my PS4 are already in use because I have one for the hard drive and one charging the controller. And so I had to unplug one of those, then plug in my PSVR set, my PSVR box. I also have to dig out my PSVR wands if I want to use them, which I'm never using, and so they're never out.
Get the camera out. I have for my PSVR setup.
And also sometimes you gotta like get it right.
The head orientation.
Whenever you start a game,
things.
like you have to like see yourself in your room, and you always feel awkward because you're like, oh, that's how I look today.
So
you have to commit an afternoon to this.
Yeah, like there's a whole setup to PSVR that, for me, as somebody who loves the platform and who loves the library, if I want to play a PSVR game, it has to be a practical decision. I have to know that I want to play PSVR.
Exactly.
Whereas Oculus Quest, at any point, I'm popping that thing on, and I'm like, all right, let's play some Thumper. I'm having a good time.
You just draw an outline, and
Thumper's
then
godlike.
Sometimes I actually haven't played Thumper in VR, and I really need to. Yeah, I love that the outline stays. It knows where you are in your apartment or house or whatever, and will remember exactly what the parameters you set up are, which is dope.
Yeah.
So we probably need to move on because we're running out of time. But I did just want to say, this jump in user growth is the largest jump in Steam VR usage ever. Valve's April survey shows the monthly number of VR headsets connected to Steam. Currently, 1.91% of Steam users have connected a virtual reality headset, which is like a pretty solid amount of people.
And they deserve some credit for pouring all the resources into making a AAA exclusive VR game. I don't know if there's another company that would do that.
No, again, that's the only way they were ever going to make more Half-Life is if they could use it to push a medium, and I think that they've done that, and I think that we'll keep getting cool stuff like this going forward, which is super exciting.
All right, let's go to questions.
Res. Shout outs to Res VR.
Oh, yeah, also very good.
Anyway.
We don't have a ton of questions, but this one, let's see. Someone named Autumn Farrell asks... Not familiar with her. For our guests, what's been the highest point in your career so far? What's been the lowest? Interesting question.
Oh, wow. That's a deep question. Highest point, I think for me has been getting hired at Kinda Funny. Like I've only been at Kinda Funny for about 6 months now, and I got hired in January. I got brought on and announced in January, and that's been a great point for me because I've always since probably 2013, I listened to IGN podcasts. That's when I found Beyond because Last of Us came out.
Beyond.
And that was Beyond. And Last of Us was the game that made me go what's out? What else is out there? I want to learn more about this game. I want to listen to spoiler casts. I want to listen to podcasts, all that stuff, right? There's that BioShock Infinite. 2013 was just a big year for games in general. And so that's kind of the thing that led me to start listening to Beyond and GameScoop. And from there, start following folks like Greg Miller, who founded Kinda Funny, with Tim, Nick, and Colin. And I've been a fan since then. And, being able to kind of have it all come full circle to me, for me, to where now, I get to be hired and actually work for Kinda Funny. For me, that's been the high point for me. But as far as a low point, honestly, COVID-19 has kind of been fucking things up in a way that's kind of sucked. Working from home has been a tough experience for me.
I guess you would have had your first proper E3 production with the team too, and now haven't. And that's such an exciting part of working in the industry. And the way that Greg does it, or the way Kinda Funny does it in general, is obviously not just Greg that plans those. I think Tim's behind a lot of that kind of planning.
Probably.
But it seems like that's something Tim would do. It's
GDC
super cool.
was the first thing that I had to miss, and then E3 and pretty much the whole year is a wash as far as attending events and doing anything.
That is a
but
problem.
then working from home and having to do the video thing has been kind of not a struggle because we Kinda Funny's figured it out and it's been good. But I just highly prefer being in person in the studio, having that energy. You kind of have to make it's hard to kind of have the same hosting energy from my bedroom when I'm sitting next to my bed, and I'm looking out the window and seeing people walk by, and it's oh, I'm home.
True.
It's difficult, but it's all right. When it comes down to it, it's fine. I want to say it could be worse, but we're kind of at a place where things are kind of already.
It got worse.
It got worse, and so whatever.
How about you, Woolie?
Yeah, I'd say high points would be so for the longest while, the old group I was a part of, Super Best Friends, we all are, from Montreal, Canada, and so when we were recording, it was just something where we were, we didn't really get to go out to many events and do a lot of things, and one of the first times we kind of went out to an event was I remember flew out to LA, and like we got to do a really cool episode with the Game Grumps and recorded a fun thing with them. And then we got to basically do like a meetup, and we had no idea like where to go or what to do or like who we were going to meet. And I remember we just kind of impromptu said, yeah, we'll just be at around one, come hang out, I guess, we'll have a few beers. And like hundreds of people came out.
Whoa.
And we ended up standing outside because we couldn't fit inside in a line that was like, we were there for like 5 hours. It was madness. And just finding out for the first time, holy shit, this many people care and like want to say what's up, was like just an impact of like, wait, what? Like it was huge,
I had that experience at RTX too, very similar. We were just like
RTX
at a meetup with people who, back when this channel was The Know, and just I ended up hanging out at a bar with fans for like hours, just buying people drinks, talking. Just it was the best. Yeah.
It's
especially
amazing,
when you get so much shit on the internet. When you get to do stuff like that in
Yes.
person, you're like, oh,
Totally.
I needed to know that you are real and exist and are nice.
You put a face, exactly. You can
Yeah.
see like these are the people that you're talking to. You can have a real conversation with them. And same thing. We went to MagFest and just saw like such an insanely humongous crowd of people that like some people stood in line for hours just to say, hey, what's up? Like your stuff, shake a hand, take a picture. And I'm like, this is nuts, so that's definitely the high point, was like the in-person physical manifestation of all the love, that you didn't really know was real type of thing, the internet love, so to speak. And I guess, conversely, the low point definitely was, the Super Best Friends Play My group. It ended. We all split up. We went our separate ways at about a year ago. And that was just a really, rough time. It was, one of these things where like, I'd been working with this group for like almost 10 years,
Oh,
and,
wow. Yeah.
we'd been doing it for a long time. So seeing it go, everyone going their separate ways kind of thing was rough. It was a really rough time. But the positive is that like I can say that, I'm like stuff individually is going well, and things are better. So like, all the like stress and I guess anxieties and the, bad mental health stuff from that time have kind of like taken a turn for the better, but just being real, that's the high and low.
Yeah. Dealing with stuff like groups breaking up, especially because it has to be public by virtue of the nature of the internet, I think is a lot harder on those individual creators than people think, because fans will always be like, this sucks for me. I need to know why this happened. But they don't put time into thinking about how difficult it is for those actual groups themselves to deal with, and like the PR nightmare of all of that. That shit is intense. It's a lot of people, a lot of strangers' opinions at once about things they may not necessarily understand. And
Yep.
you can't talk about it necessarily.
Yes. There's a lot of opinions.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily go away. But for what it's worth, I mean, again, like I think, with time, things end up in a better place, and you just you grow from it, So
yeah, that's the main thing.
All right, let's do one more question because we're running up on time. Lucent Orb asks, what games have been the best or have done the most? I think they mean to say, what games have been the best or done the most for promoting diversity?
I'm laughing because what they wrote makes perfect sense. It's what games have been the best at or done the most for promoting diversity.
So I have an answer that springs to mind immediately for a question like that, and it is, to me, Walking Dead Season 1. Like Clementine and Lee and the whole group in that game in general, just being a game that has a diverse cast, but you don't even think about it because you're just following their stories.
Yeah.
And it's just real and impactful. And it's not even a point, you know what I mean? And it's one of those things where like after the fact, it's like, oh wow, look at that, but you're just following through this human story and with these characters. I think that was one of my favorite cases of it ever.
I'm going to put out Gears 5, I think does a really good job with diversity, but also accessibility, which I guess is just a different kind of diversity, in that it was the first game that's been rated like a full 5 stars for accessibility for deaf people. Just very good about letting a lot of people play it, and, multiple characters of entirely different races and colors and accents. And in that world, it really richens everything. So shout out to Gears 5.
I want to shout out Life is Strange and Life is Strange Before the Storm. Like those are two of my favorite games of this gen. Those games for me really touched me. Like, of course, if you're unaware of like what the game's tackling, right? Like it's you're playing as Max. You have a best friend Chloe in the original game, and like the way in which they depict their friendship and their relationship. Like I think they do a good job in those games of really inviting you in and really making you care about the characters and really making you understand the perspective of these characters. I think Before the Storm does that well as well. For me playing this game that is about like these white teenagers in suburbia, like as a black dude, I'm playing it and I'm like tearing up at certain moments.
Written
and I'm like,
by a bunch of French dudes.
Yeah, written by a bunch of French dudes.
Yeah.
Like I play it and like I start tearing up and I'm like, you get them, Max, you get them. Like those games are so good. I've also been thinking about I've been thinking a lot about GTA San Andreas honestly this week. San Andreas, that game was for me like the first game I played growing up that really depicted or that really like owned and depicted black culture in a way that I had not seen before in a video game. Like I was so used as a kid to playing like Mario 64 and like I guess a lot of Nintendo games because I had an N64, like Spider-Man 2. And I remember playing San Andreas and listening to Radio Los Santos, which is the hip hop station, and riding around Grove Street and like hearing the ways the characters talk and seeing the ways the characters interact and being like, wow, this is like I felt represented in a way that felt weird because I am not a gangster by any means. Like I don't rep that life, and this is a game that's all about gangsters, and so it feels weird almost for me to feel represented by this game. But at the same time, that game I think does such a good job of I guess just repping the culture, and of course like toward the end of the game, right, you get into riots, you get into police corruption and all these things in a way that was also my first experience with that, like with fiction.
It's basically a game about police corruption in a way.
Yeah.
So so many people that would have never picked CJ on a character select screen found out that actually I will love being CJ.
Oh yeah.
When they were forced to be him.
Yeah.
A beloved, yeah. This is kind of I don't know if this is a dumb choice or not, but Stardew Valley, I liked just how they incorporated all these different characters' backstories into the game. Like there was a veteran with PTSD. There was one of the villagers was kind of homeless. Well, no, there was homeless. There was a girl who was one of your love interests is poor and lives with her mom in the trailer and is kind of ashamed. And like there was just a lot of different things like that I just thought was cool, and it was clearly made by one guy with a very clear vision about what he wanted to do. There was sort of the evil Walmart corporation. I don't know. I liked it a lot.
Can I give a shout out to one more game?
Sure.
Please.
Apex Legends. That's one that I think has such a good cast of characters, right? Like you have Bloodhound, who is non-binary. You have two black women in Bangalore and Lifeline. You have a robot. You have Octane, right? Who's missing his legs, right? The
Gibraltar
that cast,
is Maori.
Gibraltar.
Yeah.
Gibraltar is Maori. Yeah.
Yeah. Like such a diverse cast of characters in a way that doesn't at all feel weird or feel forced or any of that. Like it feels
the design
genuine.
is such a huge credit to that studio. Who I mean, they're amazing at design anyway, but the fact that those characters are so different, but when you see them all together, they still look cohesive and like they belong in the same universe is super impressive. Just like
to tie that all together. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to their team is. I mean, they put out back-to-back bangers recently. Yeah, just amazing stuff. Play Titanfall 2.
And on just a conceptual level, I've never played the game, but one of the funniest things I remember is just hearing about the game Rust as a survival game where when you boot it up and you start it, you don't get to choose what race or what gender or what anything you are handed a character and you are stuck with it no matter what. And a lot of people got really upset about that.
It's almost like the real world.
Well, now if we're doing multiplayer games, I need to change mine to Street Fighter 2. It had everybody in there.
Yeah. Marvel vs. Capcom's always been pretty good about it too. Like, yeah, the fighting games do a pretty good job.
Although I gotta be real, Street Fighter 2, if you go back and look at some of the preliminary designs before they made it into the game, they weren't great. they were bad.
Yeah?
There
Oh,
was some
yeah, I'm
rough
sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
Blanca, the green beast with the chains,
sure.
he wasn't always green.
Oh no.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Also, the women are still just very much naked, but you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, Dawson used to have 6 arms.
In that vein, shout out to Mortal Kombat 11. I like Mortal Kombat has made good progressive decisions as far as maybe not every single women character in our game needs to have their titties out bouncing, right? Like
I don't mind if some of them do.
Yeah, like some of them,
like
some of them
titties.
can, right? Like I like Sindel is a DLC character that has her titties out, and it's great. But also, like, does every single one of the characters?
No, I'm not anti-titty by any means. Love a titty.
Yeah,
physics are great, but just like if people don't dress like that constantly in real life, should they in a video game?
It's funny.
Yeah,
like
not everything is titty. Yeah,
everything is titty.
My 7-year-old daughter is getting into games now, and she will not play a game if the lead or she doesn't have the option to choose a female character. She just won't. Like she's just not interested. And at one point we were playing Smash Ultimate, and we told her that Samus was a girl. And she's been she was like, what? Are you, and she made me like show her pictures from the Zero Suit Samus and all this. And
that's so cute.
Made me think of that. Yeah.
It's like awesome. The first Metroid game all over again when everyone was surprised by that. Yeah. That's great.
Exactly.
But they were surprised while also like sitting there with their boners. Whereas I assume that your daughter took it much more positively.
It was just like, what? No, wait, she's a badass. Yeah.
There's a series I want to make that I keep talking about is games with creative characters, and the creative character is not necessarily black people friendly. There's a lot of games in particular, there's some Japanese ones where it ain't great.
Yeah.
Like I've played games where it's like you go from like the Caucasian skin color into basically purple. So there's some Soul Calibur games where it's not great at features. So
and hair is such a big thing, right? Like hair is like my main issue with so many creation tools, because like they never nail it, right? Like it's either a buzz cut or for some reason like an afro mohawk and no in between, or like cornrows. Yeah,
you might get cornrows.
Very popular.
I remember Sunset Overdrive specifically getting a lot of praise for actually having. I think I don't want to say this if it's not true, but I feel like this is what I read, was that they basically just like went to all of their black staff and were like, let's authentically pull some images together and make sure we actually get this shit right.
That's amazing.
What a concept.
It shouldn't be amazing, but they put effort into it.
All right, we're coming up on time. Let's end it there. Woolie and Blessing, thank you so much for joining us. Anything you guys want to plug on the way out? Go for it.
Again, PS Love You XOXO is Kind of Funny's PlayStation podcast that I host with Greg Miller. I highly recommend people check that out. And then aside from that, I'm on Twitter at Blessing Jr. And I also host Kind of Funny Games daily, quite a few days out the week. And that's available on youtube.com/kindoffunnygames.
I've got Let's Plays and streams of not just fighting games, but all kinds of different games going on YouTube and on Twitch, both Woolie Versus, and I'm on Twitter at Woolie Wools. Check me out, see if you like what you see.
Awesome. We'll have to have y'all back. This was great.
Please do.
And we will see you guys next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
One of the big stories that happened this week, recently we got a state of play on Last of Us 2. I forget how quickly that game is coming. It's just a few weeks away. It's coming out in June, and
feels weird right now, huh?
Yeah. It's for such a big game too. It feels like a game we've been waiting on.